Go inside the Crimson Tide with your hosts Rodney Orr and Gary Harris, keeping you informed on everything Alabama. Tider Insider TV, brought to you by Visit Tuscaloosa.
And hello again, everybody, and welcome into the latest edition of Tider Insider Television alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com. I'm WVUA 23 Sports Director Gary Harris. Well, it ultimately came down to Alabama and SMU for the final spot in the 12-team college football playoff. Alabama, of course, 9-3 on the season with no appearance in the SEC championship game. The Mustangs went to the ACC championship game and lost on a 56-yard field goal to Clemson on the final play of the game. They finished their season 11-2. Obviously, the committee had a tough decision. Going into the weekend, you felt like Alabama was in. If SMU had won, Alabama would have been in. Had Clemson went ahead and won by 17 points, the way they were leading going into the fourth quarter, Alabama would have been in. But by SMU coming back and tying it up in the final seconds, although they couldn't keep it tied for 16 seconds, Rodney, covered the kickoff, by the way, and then losing on a 56-yard field goal, that was enough to get SMU in. And Alabama out. So the Tide 9-3 and now getting ready for the ReliaQuest Bowl on New Year's Eve in Tampa against Michigan. First, your reaction to the news this weekend of Alabama not being in the 12-team CFP.
Well, I think the way the fourth quarter played out, Gary, I felt like, look, it's going to be really tough for the committee to put Alabama in, the way the game ended. I'm like you. I thought if Clemson had continued the way they were playing throughout the game and, won by a comfortable margin, 10, 17, whatever it was, I felt like Alabama was in great position. Here's what I would say, though, Gary, and I know we're going to get into this, but you look at the resumes, which we saw, right? Okay, so Miami really has a better resume than SMU, if you look at them closely. The committee puts Alabama ahead of Miami last week, but they don't put Alabama ahead of SMU on Sunday. That's really tough to understand when you look at the strength of the schedule, you look at the top 25 wins, you look at the competition, all of those things. I think you're penalizing teams, not just Alabama, South Carolina, Ole Miss. You're penalizing teams that played much stronger schedules. Yeah,
I think the emotions of that game had a lot to do with putting SMU in, with that committee getting caught up in that. Yeah, resume-wise, Alabama and SMU, there's no comparison. Even though SMU only has 2 losses, Alabama has 3. SMU did not beat a top 25 team. Listen, Alabama beat Georgia. They beat Missouri 34-0. They beat South Carolina. They blew out LSU in Baton Rouge. They beat Wisconsin on the road. And then, maybe I'm biased, probably covering Alabama, but I thought Alabama deserved that 12th and final spot. Now, listen, I'm not trying to undo what happened in Norman, Oklahoma, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Knoxville, for that matter. In fact, we were critical of Alabama for all 3 of those losses, feeling like they should have probably won every one of those games. But still, at the end of the day, it's about your body of work, and it also is the SEC versus the ACC. I think that should matter, Rodney. And the fact that the SEC did not get 4 teams in, the Big Ten did, and the ACC got 2, just 1 less than the SEC. I think that's a fail for Greg Sankey in the SEC office.
Well, look, I would say this, too. I mean, what do you really want? Do you want the 12 best teams? I mean, that would seemingly be the purpose of the playoff, is to get the 12 best teams. I understand, again, SMU had a fantastic season. They did not win their conference, however. Yeah, they made it to the conference playoff game. They did not play in a conference with the strength of schedule anywhere near, and we've talked about that, what the SEC is, what Alabama played. And again, I want to say this too. I keep saying Alabama, but I want to make sure South Carolina, Ole Miss, other teams in the SEC that I think are better contenders, if you will, for a national championship if you put them in a 12-team playoff than what we will see with SMU.
Yeah, now one thing I don't want to do is just again, go on. And I hear the argument about, well, Alabama had a chance to take care of business in Norman, and they didn't. And they didn't. I get that, all right? And at the time, I said after that game that I didn't think there was any way they could make it in the college football playoff. But the way it played out those last couple of weeks gave Alabama an opportunity. As I said, I think they deserved to get in, but they didn't. So you move on. And you're going to move on to playing a bowl game, which we'll have more on that in just a moment. But right now, let's get to Coach Talk. Alabama's argument of superior strength of schedule did not come to fruition as far as getting into the playoff. Alabama head coach Kalen DeBoer was asked if that will affect how the program schedules future opponents. He says that's a question for Director of Athletics Greg Byrne, but he still sees a benefit to being a part of marquee games.
We want to play competitive games. We want to play the best games. And, I understand how it didn't feel like that definitely wasn't rewarded. It felt like our schedule and the wins we had against teams, that were ranked or, now ranked or even ranked at the time. We want to be a part of that. We want that to happen. That's the exciting thing about college football, is being in as many big games as possible. We don't want to back down to that. We want to be a part of it, and that hopefully will be rewarded down the road.
And Sunday evening, following the CFP show, Alabama Director of Athletics Greg Byrne posted a message on social media expressing his disappointment. Part of Byrne's message was, quote, "With this outcome, we will need to assess how many P4 non-conference games make sense in the future to put us in the best position to participate in the CFP. That is not good for college football." End quote. Alabama now turns its attention to the ReliaQuest Bowl. The Crimson Tide faces Michigan on New Year's Eve at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa. It's a rematch of last year's college football playoff semifinal at the Rose Bowl, won by Michigan 27-20 in overtime on the way to the Wolverines national championship. All right, Rodney, motivation for the bowl game. Let's go ahead and start talking about what Alabama has in front of it. I think there should be plenty of motivation. I've always said, you play college football to play games. If you got a game to play, that should be a lot of motivation. Plus for the fact that it's a chance to win 10 games and keep that remarkable streak alive. Alabama's won 10 or more every season since 2008. And also just to finish off this season the right way and to build momentum going into the next season. So I hope I don't hear meaningless bowl game, because it's not meaningless. I think it's a big game between two of the marquee blue blood programs in the history of college football.
Well, I think that's what makes it really important, because you're paired with Michigan. Again, I know they didn't have a great season. They have a great program. Obviously, Alabama, you talked about the Rose Bowl last year, but the national championship game, they beat Kalen DeBoer's Washington team there. So, again, I think there's a lot here with these two teams in terms of their tradition and all of those things. There should be a lot of pride.
And chance to get a little payback, too.
Sure.
But you're right about Michigan, 5 losses, but they proved what they could do when they went into Columbus and beat Ohio State at the Horseshoe. All right, obviously the portal is going to affect this team, but portal guys going to the portal and opt-outs are two different things in my mind. If you went in the portal, I don't expect you to play in the game. I wouldn't anyway. You never know. But Coach DeBoer did say that he felt like they would have minimal opt-outs as far as the players that were eligible to play in the game, and I think that's good news. We'll see, but I hope that most of this team that's still on this roster will play in this game.
Well, I think that's one thing that Nick Saban kind of built into the culture of this program. You look at a lot of other schools throughout the last several years. When this has come up, they haven't made the playoffs. They've had a lot of opt-outs. You look at even Florida State last year. They were wiped out heading into that game against Georgia. So I think it is really important. I think it says a lot about your program, the culture, the players you have in it, how they view their program. So I was really encouraged after listening to Kalen DeBoer when he talked about, look, we're going there. We're preparing to win the game. We've got a lot of our leaders. They want to play in this game. So I think that's extremely important.
All right, I do want to ask you a question, and this is not necessarily about this game, but for the future. Jalen Milroe has been the starter the last 2 years at quarterback. He is eligible for the draft. He also is eligible to come back for another season of college football. What are you hearing there? Do you think Jalen Milroe will be back at Alabama in 2025?
Gary, I would probably say I highly doubt Jalen Milroe's back at Alabama. If I had to guess, I'm not really sure another year will improve his stock for the NFL. Maybe it would. But I think there comes a time for players to move on. And I think now is probably that time for Jalen Milroe. All
right, I do hope he plays in the bowl game regardless of what happens. And obviously, Tyler Booker and those guys. Again, to me, an opt-out is somebody that's eligible to play and doesn't play. Guys going in the portal, I guess if they wanted to, maybe they could ask to play. But again, Rodney, am I right there? Would you expect most of the guys that have announced they go into the portal will start working for their new deals and probably not play in this game?
Right. That's generally how it works. Now, again, there may be an exception here or there, but I would say generally they're probably not going to play.
All right. Well, still to come on Tider Insider Television, the Alabama men's basketball team picked up an impressive road win last week. Stay tuned, and we'll tell you more about the Tide's trip to Chapel Hill. And in terms of more football news, Alabama's bringing in another highly rated class of recruits. Rodney's going to break that down for you. And also, I'll ask him, are there more guys that could sign with the Tide out of high school coming up in February? And we'll be getting your phone calls, emails, and tweets. That's just a little bit later on in the show. 205-348 WVUA is the number, 348-9882. You can email us at the address on your screen. We'll be getting to your phone calls in just a little bit. TITV will return right after this timeout. This past Wednesday, as we come back into TITV on WVUA 23, Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. This past Wednesday was the first first signing period for high school football recruits, and Alabama eat 21 players as part of the 2025 recruiting class. And the Crimson Tide, Rodney, a very highly rated group. They're coming from 9 states and Canada. And 4 signees are 5-star prospects: offensive tackle Michael Carroll, quarterback Dijon Lee Jr., offensive tackle Jackson Lloyd, and quarterback Keelan Russell. There are also 15 players that are 4-star recruits. Rodney, what impresses you most about this class?
Well, look, you look at this class, you mentioned 9 states. That's really good. Nick Saban had classes from 16 and 17 states. Alabama is a national brand when it comes to recruiting, Gary. I say that to say, they go to California. They get the top 2 players out of California. They go to the state of Texas and get the number 1 player, Keelan Russell, the number 1 player in the state of Florida, Michael Carroll, the offensive lineman, and those 2 kids in California, by the way, cornerback Dijon Lee and offensive tackle Jackson Lloyd. So Alabama goes to the hotbeds of recruiting across the country and lands the top players. Again, I think it's a really good class. You look at the offensive line, even though they're probably not going to get Ty Haywood, who's been committed for a long time. He may end up at Michigan. I think it was a fantastic offensive line class. I think you look at the quarterback, obviously, Keelan Russell. He is a Kalen DeBoer type player. I think you look at the receivers. They got Latsier Brooks, Derek Meadows, the late flip from LSU. They got a couple of defensive linemen. They got an outstanding linebacker class. And I mentioned Dijon Lee in the secondary. Overall, they got a really good secondary class. So I think when you look at it, it's a well-rounded group.
Let's talk more about Derek Meadows, because he had been committed to LSU. He flips on signing day. He's 6'6", and with Caleb Odom going in the portal, and we know that this coaching staff wants some tall wide receivers, you would suspect that he may have a chance to play early.
He might. Now, look, here's the thing, too. I mean, you look at him right there. That's going up for the ball at 6'6". He's a guy that creates a lot of headaches for DBs. And Gary, he's not even polished yet. I mean, he's a guy that Jamarcus Shepard can take and mold into a fantastic player. He's got really good speed for a guy you're talking about, again, close to 6'6".
Do you think there may be more high school signees? Of course, obviously, you'd still love to get Ty Haywood, although that looks unlikely. More high school signees coming in February?
Right now, I don't know. That's a good question. I think as we move forward, maybe we'll get an answer to that. I don't think so. I think the real emphasis, obviously, right now is the portal. And I think that's where Alabama can supplement this class. And, possibly with the guys that they bring in, they're going to evaluate the recruiting services. They could have the number 1 class again.
You mentioned that the portal recruiting is a whole nother deal. And Alabama looking to add some talent there. Concepcion, great wide receiver at North Carolina State. And Kelby Collins, defensive lineman from Florida, who's out of Gardendale High School, that Alabama recruited out of high school. Both these young men expected to be on campus this weekend.
Luke Haas, the tight end from Arkansas, who is a great, great player. He's supposed to be here, too. You see Concepcion here, some of these highlights at North Carolina State. Gary, listen, he was the freshman of the year in the ACC in 2023, caught 71 passes. He was the only player in FBS that had over 750 yards receiving and 250 rushing in that season. So, I mean, he's a fantastic player, been there a couple of years. He ends up here. That's a really big receiver to get for Alabama.
Yeah, and like I said, Kelby Collins is an in-state product, a proven defensive lineman in the SEC. Considered Alabama heavily out of high school. I mean, listen, you can't get enough defensive linemen in this league, and to be able to get one already that's proven he can play at the SEC level would be huge.
He had a really good freshman year a couple of years ago. This past year as a sophomore, maybe not quite to that level. But there you see. You remember we played this video here.
Yeah, we went and covered it.
When he walked in and committed to Florida.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to hoops. And Alabama basketball getting a huge win last week in that SEC-ACC Challenge up in Chapel Hill. They've beaten Carolina now several times in a row, including last year in the NCAA tournament, and knocked them out. 94-79, Alabama controlled this one throughout. Mark Sears headed up 6 guys in double figures with 20 points. And this game was also noteworthy for the fact that Latrell Reitzel, of course, is out for the season. So Houston Millette agreed to have his red shirt taken off because he was going to red shirt and play next year because of Reitzel playing this year. He agreed to take his red shirt off. He came out and played in this game and played well. So, Rodney, this Tide is 7-2. They got Creighton, a really good team that beat Kansas coming in here on Saturday. But to be able to go into Chapel Hill and beat North Carolina at the Dean Dome, I don't take that lightly.
No. What depth? We've talked about this roster since they got it finalized and how much depth they had to be able to take a kid like Millette, takes the red shirt off, comes in, contributes right away in a significant way. Look, I think you're right, Gary. Going to North Carolina, there were a lot of people that said, look, North Carolina's been focusing on this game. Alabama's got the best of them the last few times. And you know what? What a great performance.
Yeah, Millette in just 9 minutes, 6 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 steals as he plays his way into game shape. All right, still to come on TITV, our weekly Bama in the NFL segment. Find out some of the former Crimson Tide players that showed out in Week 14. And we'll be getting your phone calls, emails, and tweets. Phone lines are open right now at 205-348-9882. We want to hear from you, and we'll have those phone calls coming up next on TITV. Always exciting to check in on Bama in the NFL. Boy, Jerry Jeudy has been lighting it up. There's famous Jameis Winston, Hueytown's finest, the former Alabama wide receiver. That's a 35-yard strike. Jeudy 5 catches, 64 yards, and that touchdown. Najee Harris on the other side, 53 yards rushing, and this score to help the Steelers get the division win, 27-14. And Charlotte, Bryce Young is playing great right now. He was on one side, Jalen Hurts on the other. There's Young, he hit a pass, and here's Hurts to Devontae Smith. Bryce hit a pass in this game, Rodney, to Leggett at the end that he catches it. They're probably going to win the game, and he dropped it. But still, Eagles get the win, 22-16. And Tua lit it up. And what his main target, you know, he's got the cheetah bow. How about Jalen Waddle, too, now? That's Waddle catches that ball, and he can go with it. Tua well over 300 yards, no interceptions. Huge win for the Dolphins in overtime against the Jets. They had to have this one to stay in playoff contention. So, as always, Bama in the NFL. It is so much fun. You know what else is fun? Rodney taking phone calls here on Tider Insider TV. And our pal Sammy up in Walker County is going to lead us off. Hey, Sammy.
Hey, Gary. Rodney, great job, guys. My question, fellas, was the signing date defensive line prospects. And Rodney and Gary, give me y'all's evaluation. Do you think we did okay? Need better ones? Need more? Thanks, guys.
All right, Sammy, I'll let Rodney handle that. I'll say what I always say, though. If you don't have them up front on defense in this league, you're not going to be in Atlanta, or you're not going to be in the playoff. You got to have defensive linemen. What did you think of the Tide's recruiting class?
You know, Gary, there was a lot of people that said, hey, this isn't a real priority. Look, defensive line, in my opinion, Sammy, offensive line, linemen in a class, they're always a priority. I mean, you've got to sign top-notch defensive linemen. You look at what Alabama did. I think London Simmons out of Flowood, Mississippi, is a good player. Certainly played on a really good team there that won the state championship. So I think he's a solid player. I think when you look at Steve M. out of the junior college player originally from Canada that Alabama signed, again, I think he's got a lot of potential, but he's really raw. Cavante Henry, again, I don't know if he's going to end up a bandit defensive end. Will he end up a Wolf linebacker? I guess that really depends on his size. He's around 6'4", 245, maybe 250. But he is a great edge rusher. We know that. Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't think Alabama's done a really good job of signing big, strong, interior, dominant defensive linemen. One of the reasons, Sammy, those guys are few and far between. They're hard to find. So I think you've got to be able to get guys. You've got to have the coaching and develop them. That is the real key, and I think they've got some guys that they can develop.
All right, still to come on Tider Insider Television, Alabama Gymnastics is gearing up for the new season. They had a preview meet this past Friday night. And more of your phone calls, emails, and tweets, including our email question of the day, is on the way. That phone number again, 205-348-9882. Tider Insider Television will return after this. The Alabama Gymnastics team hosted its Crimson and White preview meet this past Friday night, giving the fans a chance to see the Tide with 40 different Alabama routines and 4 gymnasts participating in the all-around. So great opportunity as the White team defeated the Crimson, and they held the lead all meet long. Alabama opens the regular season on home January 10th against North Carolina. Well, welcome back into TITV with Rodney Orr. I'm Gary Harris, and it's time for the email question of the day, brought to you by KDM Service Corporation. serving your family like our family. Now, I watched the Auburn game, and Bama got called for offensive PI, which was a bad call. How bad is officiating in the SEC? That's from Jim in Sparks, Nevada. I can't recall the particular call. I know we've been getting a lot of emails about officiating, Rodney. And, again, I'm going to say what I always say. I think it can be better. I think it needs to be better. But it is a very difficult job. And there was the little melee skirmish there on the sideline. But, you know, they're doing the best they can, and they are graded every week, and there is a system in place. So we're just going to have to trust the Southeastern Conference head of officiating and the office that they're doing the best they can to put the best officials out there every week.
You know, yeah, and I think that right there, again, I know that went against Alabama on Malachi Moore and also Devontae Smith there. But at the same time, I mean, that was hard not to call on both sides. And, you know, Gary, I think there's some things that you look at, maybe pass interference calls that are inconsistent. There's a lot of inconsistencies in that, but at the same time, you know, I think they do a pretty good job overall. All
right, we're going to get to an email question, another email question before we get to the break, and it's from Lori in Alabaster. Any chance that Alabama will take a quarterback from the transfer portal? Well, that'll also tie in to Doug calling earlier and leaving a message about Malik Murphy, the former Texas quarterback now at Duke that's going in the portal. Alabama's got a good roster of quarterbacks. Any chance that they might look to the portal?
You know, I don't know if they're going to look at Malik Murphy or not. I know he's a five-star by some, coming out of high school, out of California, went to Texas, you mentioned, transferred to Duke, and now in the portal again. So I don't really know about that, Doug. But, you know, again, I think when you look at, I expect Milroe to leave. We've talked about that. You've got Ty Simpson. You've got Dylan Lonergan, assuming both stay. You've got Austin Mack, another guy. Keelan Russell, the true freshman, coming in. Again, I think when you go through spring practice, maybe you make the evaluation, find out where you are. They've got a lot of really good young quarterbacks. Right now, I would say probably not. But then again, you never know. They may change their mind.
All right. Thanks for the phone calls and the emails. And we're going to come back on TITV on a rainy evening in Tuscaloosa. We'll be back right after this. And, Rodney, before we close it out, Antonio Langham being inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame tonight, the induction ceremony out in Las Vegas. Of course, he was a great player, two-time All-American, one-time unanimous All-American. But the biggest play that he made really changed the course of college football was to save that SEC championship game, the first one in 1992, with that pick six against Florida.
Man, it was a 21-21 game. Florida had all the momentum. We're getting late. Wasn't looking good, was it, Gary? And then all of a sudden, Langham makes the pick, returns it for a touchdown. He did it the week before against Auburn, too.
The rest, as they say, is history. That's going to do it for the program. Catch a replay tonight at 10:35. For Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. Good night, everybody.